I have written a book entitled Winning with People. In your notes, I would like to point you to the thesis as we begin the foundation of how you and I can have and develop great relationships with others. The thesis of the book is very simple, but it's also very powerful. People can usually trace their successes and failures to relationships in their lives. That's an absolute fact. If you would look at your successes or your failures, I would almost guarantee you every time something good has happened to you or every time something difficult has happened to you, you could point it back to some relationship that you've had in life. For example, our successes. In my book on the laws of teamwork, I talk about the law of significance that says one is too small of a number to achieve greatness. And basically what I say in that law is simple. If you and I are going to achieve something that's worthy and worthwhile and is something that is an achievement, I will almost guarantee you it will be done with someone else, not just by ourselves. It's also true in our failures. In your notes, I talk about the fact that 7 out of 10 people lose their jobs because of personality conflicts. Think about it. Think about people that you've had to let go in your office, or perhaps maybe at a time in the past you've had to be let go. I will almost guarantee you it's some kind of a personality conflict. I have a minor degree in counseling, and I've done a little bit of it, not a lot. But I can tell you this. If you're sitting down counseling people, almost all the time, it's in some area of relationships. Somebody's struggling with somebody, somebody's having a difficult time with someone. It's almost always a relationship issue. In your notes, Kim Hemphill said this: with all the emphasis on improved education in America, you might think knowledge is the greatest asset for vocational success. The Carnegie Foundation discovered relational skills are far more important if you hope to succeed at work. Their study found that only 15% of a person's success is determined by job knowledge and technical skills. 85% is determined by an individual's attitude and ability to relate to other people. Recently, I was amused by some of the resumes that I saw in Forbes magazine. It was kind of almost like a, can you believe that people would put this on your resume type of an article. And I thought, since this is a relationship lesson, and I've written a relationship book, I thought I would just share with you a few of these resumes. You're just not going to believe them. For example, these are real resumes, okay? People applying for real jobs. People saying things like, it's best for employers if I don't work with people. Now, there's one to hire, isn't it, huh? Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, we'll put you over here in the corner and you'll never see anybody. We don't want to have people involved in your life. Here's another one. The company made me a scapegoat, just like my previous employers. Absolutely. I'm the scapegoat. Here's one. Note, please don't misconstrue my 14 jobs as job hopping. I have never quit a job. One more. I love this one. References? None. I've left a path of destruction behind me. The book is entitled Winning with People, Discover the People Principles That Work Every Time. Now, when you look at that book and you realize that I say discover the people principles that work every time, I didn't say, and I want to make sure you understand it, I didn't say discover the people principles that work every time for everybody. I didn't say discover the people principles that work for others every time. I did say discover the people principles that work for you every time. Because, two things in your notes, these people principles will help you better understand others. And two, they will help you better understand yourself. The result, the daily practice of these people principles will improve your people skills with everyone. Note, I did not say everyone would like you. That's impossible. You see, we cannot always determine how others will respond to us. We can always determine how we will respond to others. So therefore, note, when I respond correctly to you, I win. That's what these people principles will teach you. They'll teach you how to respond correctly to others. When others respond correctly to me, we win. What I'm concerned about is not how other people relate to you. I'm concerned about how you relate to others. A long time ago, I learned that I cannot control the actions or the reactions of others. But if I understand people correctly, and if I have good people skills, I can control mine. And I can determine not how they feel about me, but I can determine how I feel about them. In fact, one time I shared with someone, I said, I have no enemies. And they looked at me and said, well, how could you have no enemies? Being a leader like you are and a strong leader and building organizations, you've got to have a lot of people that aren't happy with you. I said, oh, no, I didn't say a lot of people were unhappy with me. I have no enemies. See, how you treat me, that's your choice. How I treat you, that's my choice. If you don't like me, that's your choice. I'll still choose to like you. Too many times, we underestimate the power of personal choice. And when I talk about how these people principles will help you to win with people, what I know is if you have the right attitude with the right relationship skills and the proper understanding of people, you will always win. In your notes. In life, the skills you use and the people you choose will make or break you. I've divided the people principles in this book according to 5 critical questions that we must ask ourselves if we want to win with people. Number 1 is readiness. Are we prepared for relationships? Number 2, connection. Are we willing to focus on others? 3 is trust. Can we build mutual trust? 4, investment. Are we willing to invest in others? And finally, number 5, synergy. Can we create a win-win relationship? I want to talk to you first of all today about readiness. Are we prepared for relationships? Now, in this readiness level of relationships, there are 5 people principles. Number 1, the lens principle. The lens principle says who we are determines how we view others. I love the Groucho Marx comment. I wouldn't want to belong to any club that would accept me as a member. Says it all, doesn't it? You see, the question I must ask myself is, what is my perception of others? Because who you are determines the way you see everything. You cannot separate your identity from your perspective. All that you are and every experience that you've had color how you see things. It's in your lens. Here's what I mean. Number 1, who you are determines what you see. A Coloradan moved to Texas and built a house with a large picture window from which he could view hundreds of miles of range land. When asked how he enjoyed the view, he responded, the only problem is there's nothing to see. About the same time, a Texan moved to Colorado and built a house with a large picture window overlooking the Rockies. When asked how he liked it, he said the only problem with this place is that you can't see anything because all those mountains are in your way. Who you are determines how you see. I was having dinner the other day with Francis Hesselbein, and I was also having time with Jim Collins, having a wonderful, really 3-hour dinner in that process. And because Francis has been with Peter Drucker for many, many years, I asked her what was the greatest thing that he ever taught her. She said that he has said to her many, many times, Francis, look out of the window and see things that are within your view that others do not see. What Peter Drucker was basically saying is, we all can look at the same thing, but we don't all see the same thing. We're going to see according to who we are. For example of that, my wife Margaret, very aware of what people wear. I am not. Many times we'll be at a party together and she'll say, you know, you were talking to the guy in the blue sweater. What was he talking about this evening? And I'll look at her and I'll say, what blue sweater? I can't relate. Now, she sees the person with the blue sweater. That's how she views people, by how they dress, what clothes they have on. Personally, that's nothing that really grabs hold of me. Now, see, she looks at a person entirely different than I look at a person. Who we are determines what we see. Number two, who you are determines how you see others. It's a classic old story of two guys, separate families that were moving into a little town, and on one day, one of the guys who was moving into town stopped at the local hardware store and said, "I've got to ask you a question." He said, "How are the people of this town?" And the owner of the hardware store looked at him and said, "Well, let me ask you a question. How were the people from the town that you came from?" He said, "Oh," he said, "they weren't very friendly." He said, "In fact, that's why I'm really glad to be moving to this town." And the guy at the hardware store said, "You know, I'm so sorry. They're not very friendly here either." A couple days later, another guy dropped by the same hardware store, said, "I'm moving here." He said, "I got to ask you a question. How are the people of the town?" And again, the owner of the hardware store looked at him and said, "Let me ask you, how were the people in the town that you just left?" "Oh," he said, "we hated to leave. Those people were so friendly and so warm. We had great relationships." And the owner of the hardware store says, "I've got great news for you. They're friendly here also." You see, it's a fact. Who you are determines how you see others. The way people see others is a reflection of themselves. For example, if I'm a trusting person, I will see others as trustworthy. If I'm a critical person, I will see others as critical. If I'm a caring person, I will see others as compassionate. Phil McGraw had it right when he said, "You teach people how to treat you." That is a powerful statement. Number three, who you are determines how you view life. I have the privilege of speaking to a lot of NFL teams. And one of the teams I've done a lot of work with is the St. Louis Rams. And I have a wonderful friend on the Rams team who is an offensive coach named John Maxwell. And recently I was at a Rams game, and I was sitting with his wife, Kim, and some of the wives of the other coaches on the St. Louis team. And I know for a fact, because I've known John for probably 15, 18 years, that they've lived in at least 7 or 8 different cities. Kind of being a coach, they move from city to city and are coaching with different teams. And so I said, "Kim," I said, "I've got to ask you a question. Of all the cities you've lived in," I said, "what's your favorite city?" And she said to me, she said, "Well, where I am right now." I said, "Oh, you like St. Louis better than any other cities that you ever lived in?" She said, "I didn't say that. You asked me what my favorite city is." And she said, "My favorite city is where I am right now." What Kim was really saying to me that day was, where you live, who you're around, basically, you're going to determine how you view people by how you are yourself. And Kim was saying, I have a good attitude about wherever I am, and so therefore I like wherever I am. Number 4, who you are determines what you do. The question I've always asked myself is, what determines who I am and who you are? Well, number 1 is genetics, no doubt about that. My wife and I have had the privilege of adopting 2 children. They're now grown, married, and we have 4 grandchildren from them. And they were great delights to us. But when I and Margaret adopted them, many, many, many years ago, I was about 85% an environmentalist and about a 15% genetics. Now, having raised 2 adopted children, I'm about 85% genetics and about 15% environment. It's kind of like when I was a pastor and didn't have any children, I had great lessons on how to raise your kids. Then I had some and went into about a 20-year silence. But who we are, major genetic issues. Number 2, self-image. He was exactly right when T.S. Eliot said, "Half of the harm that is done in this world is due to people who want to feel important. They do not mean to do harm. They are absorbed in the endless struggle to think well of themselves." Number 3, experiences in life. Basically, the experiences that you and I have do mold us. And I would say this, we've all heard it said that experience is the best teacher. But I'm here to tell you it isn't. Never has been. I've known all kind of people who have had all kind of experience, and they haven't learned anything. Just because you're getting older doesn't mean you're getting better. Evaluated experience is the best teacher. The ability to look at where you have been and what you have done and pull back and reflect and evaluate, that's the instructor of our life. Number 4, attitude. Attitudes and choices about those experiences determine what you and I do. Number 5, friends. The friends that we associate with have a great determining factor on who we are and what we do. I close with this paragraph on people principle number 1, the lens principle. The way you view others is determined by who you are. You cannot get away from that truth. If you don't like people, that really is a statement about you and the way that you look at people. Who you are determines how you view others. Your viewpoint is the problem. If that's the case, don't try to change others. Don't even focus on others. Focus on yourself. If you change yourself and become the kind of person you desire to be, you will begin to view others in a whole new light. And that will change the way you interact in all of your relationships. People principle number 2. The mirror principle. The mirror principle says the first person we must examine is ourselves. And coping with difficult people, I love this quote, coping with difficult people is always a problem, especially if the difficult person happens to be you. And the question I must ask myself, have I examined myself and taken responsibility for who I am? Here's how the mirror test works. People unaware of who they are and what they do often damage relationships with others. The way to change that is to look in the mirror. It is something all of us must do. It's what I call taking the mirror test. Consider these truths that we must learn about ourselves. Number 1, the first person I must know is myself. That speaks of our self-awareness. Human nature seems to endow people with the ability to size up everybody in the world but themselves. That is so true. As I have worked and talked and counseled with people, they're a much better evaluator of others than they are of themselves. Because you see, we judge others by their actions and we judge ourselves by our motives. We know what we intend to do, what we would want to do, what we feel and what we would like to have done. Number 2, the first person I must get along with is myself. This deals with my self-image. Sidney Harris observed, if you're not comfortable with yourself, you can't be comfortable with others. I would take that one step farther. If you do not believe in yourself, you will sabotage relationships. Most of you are aware, because I wrote the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, that I talk about the law of the lid. The law of the lid basically says that if this hand is my leadership skill, then this lid, this leadership skill and effectiveness will determine how I can grow my organization or how I can develop my department, etc. That there's a lid, a leadership lid that keeps us from expanding or growing. I would just stop and say to you, that's true about relationships also. There's a relationship lid that keeps us from expanding and growing in our knowledge and understanding and connection with and relationship with others. And it deals with this right here. If you can't get along with yourself, if you have a poor self-image, I can promise you, you'll never get along with a lot of people, and you'll never be able to believe in them because you don't believe in yourself. Number 3, the first person to cause me problems is myself. That's self-honesty. Or as comedian Jack Parr quipped, looking back, my life seems like one big obstacle race with me being the chief obstacle. I did a tape one time, a leadership tape, entitled How to Get Out of Your Own Way. And basically the thesis of the tape was, don't worry about competition. Most people never get sidetracked with competition or beat up by competition. They just blow themselves up. Most people, if you just let them alone, it's only a matter of time till they go into the ditch. We can't even win a race sometimes with ourselves because of the self-image, because of this whole process of the mirror principle, and unable to cope with who we really are. Number 4, the first person I must change is myself. This deals with self-improvement. In the crypts of Westminster Abbey, the following words were written on the tomb of an Anglican bishop who lived in the 11th century. When I was young and free, my imagination had no limits, and I dreamed of changing the world. As I grew older and wiser, I discovered the world would not change, so I shortened my sights somewhat and decided to change only my country. But it too seemed immovable. As I grew in my twilight years, in one last desperate attempt, I settled for changing only my family, those closest to me. But alas, they would have none of it. And now as I lie on my deathbed, I suddenly realized if I had only changed myself first, then by example I would have changed my family, and from their inspiration and encouragement, I would have been able to better my country, and who knows, I may have even changed my world. Number 5, the first person that can make a difference is myself. This deals with self-responsibility. In the 17 Indisputable Laws of Teamwork, I wrote about the law of significance, that one is too small of a number to achieve greatness. I truly believe that no significant accomplishment can be achieved by individual effort. However, I also believe that every significant accomplishment begins with the vision of one individual. That person not only possesses the vision, but also takes responsibility for carrying it out to others. If you want to make a difference in this world, you must take responsibility for yourself. A couple of years ago, I was going to Australia to speak at a conference, and Margaret and I stopped for a couple of days at Christchurch, New Zealand. Beautiful country. The first morning when we got up at our hotel, Margaret and I both love Diet Coke in the morning to kind of get that caffeine, get that blood flowing for you. And so I went on a search to find some Diet Coke, which I couldn't find any Diet Coke and couldn't find any ice. And I'm wandering the halls, and I see this door that basically says staff only. And me being the kind of person I am, I assumed that back there is the ice, and back there probably is some Diet Cola, and I raised my right hand, made myself a staff member, and entered the door. And looked around, and there was no Diet Coke, there was no ice. I'm about to leave this little area that was for staff only, and I look at the door that I'm about to open to walk out, and there's a full-length mirror. And at the top of the full-length mirror, it had these words: take a good look at yourself. What you see, the customer is about to see. And as I looked at that little mirror and I saw those words, I said to myself, every day I would like to tell people, before you go out into the world, look in the mirror. Take a good look at yourself. Because who you are is how you'll see others. What you represent by your actions, by your face, is going to have a lot to determine on how well you relate to people. Now, a lot of times, people, when they look in the mirror, they don't want to face reality. They're like the guy with a health problem. And he says, Doc, could you just touch up the x-rays? Could you just kind of work on those a little bit? It's not an x-ray issue. It's something that you and I have to do as we look in the mirror. People principle number 3, the pain principle. The pain principle says, hurting people hurt people and are easily hurt by them. Be yourself is about the worst advice you can give some people. Have you ever thought of that? Oh, just be yourself. Oh, now that I see your behavior, second thought, don't be yourself. Try imitating someone else for once. You see, the question I must ask myself is, do I hurt people, or am I too easily hurt by them? The pain principle says, hurting people hurt people and are easily hurt by people. To really understand the pain principle and have it help you dealing with others, you need to keep in mind these 4 truths. Number 1, there are many hurting people. It doesn't take a psychiatrist to see many people that are hurting today. Columnist Ann Landers asserted that, I love this, here's what Ann Landers says, 1 in 4 Americans is imbalanced. Then she added that we should look at our 3 closest friends, and if they seem to be okay, it means we're the one. The reality is that being normal is now the exception, not the norm. A philosopher one time compared the human race to porcupines huddled together on a bitter, cold winter night. The colder it gets outside, the more we huddle together for warmth, but the closer we get to one another, the more we hurt one another with our sharp quills. And in the lonely night of Earth's winter, eventually we begin to drift apart and wander out on our own and freeze to death in our loneliness. Second statement, those hurting people often hurt people. German poet Hermann Hesse wrote, if you hate a person, you hate something in him that is part of yourself. What isn't part of ourselves doesn't disturb us. Number 3, those hurting people are often hurt by people. The greatest illustration that I can give you of that is, I have a wonderful friend, Kevin Myers, and we were talking about this pain principle one day, and he said, John, and this is so true, he said, it's like a splinter in your finger. You know, if I have a splinter in this finger right here, and you come up to me and we shake hands, haven't seen each other, and you give me a good hearty handshake, if I have a splinter here, I have a tendency to pull back real fast. And you just shook my hand, all of a sudden I'm pulling away from you. You say, what's wrong? Well, what's wrong is I have an infected finger. And if I have an infected finger, anytime it's touched, I overreact. That's true with people. People that are infected on the inside overreact. And we're always amazed because we say something that perhaps we in no way even thought was going to be harmful or hurtful. And we say it and we watch them almost recoil from us, and we say, what did I say? Well, I want you to understand, it's not always what we say. If they are a hurting person, they have probably great capacity not only to hurt you, but to be hurt by you. The pain principle basically says that when somebody overreacts way out of bounds, it's almost always the fact that inside there's some infection of the soul and the spirit that causes them to do that. Number 4, those hurting people often hurt themselves. That's probably one of the saddest things to me, is that as they are hurting others or are being hurt by others, they really hurt themselves. It's like the great comedy team of many, many years ago, Amos and Andy, and Andy had a friend of his, Keenfish, who kept slapping him on the chest. And he just got tired of them getting slapped on the chest. And one day he went to his buddy Amos and he said, you know how Keenfish slaps me on the chest? He said, yes. He said, I want you to know he's never going to do that again. He said, what do you mean? He opens up his coat and there are 6 sticks of dynamite strapped to his chest. He said, I'm telling you, the next time he smacks me on the chest, he's going to blow his hand off. And when I see hurting people, I realize that in the long run, probably they will most hurt themselves. Glenn Clark advises, if you wish to travel far and fast, travel light. Take off all of your envies, jealousies, unforgiveness, selfishness, and tears. People who have not gotten past their hurt have a hard time doing that. And as a result, they act and react differently than healthy people. And I have 2 columns, healthy people, hurting people, and I talk about the differences. You can read those on your own. If you find yourself dealing with hurting people, which we all must do from time to time, then I advise you to do the following. 5 quick thoughts. 1, don't take it personally. When I was a young man leading people, and when I would have a person hurt me, it would really bother me. And I had a wise older leader one time sit me down at dinner and say, tell me that principle that hurting people hurt people. And the moment that I understood that, I looked at people that hurt me totally different than I had before. I quit taking everything that they said personally. 2, look beyond the person for the problem. Normally what I want to do is when somebody is hurting others or easily hurt by others, I want to try to see what the problem or the issue is. Number 3, look beyond the situation. You'll have an incident of which they overreact, and you'll think, oh, this isn't any good. And just you have to get beyond all of that. Number 4, do not add to their hurt. Do not fight fire with fire. Don't go to the same level that they're living on. And number 5, help them find help. And I close with this note. Wish I had 10 minutes to teach this, because this is a powerful thought in itself. But I just want to give it to you. In a relationship, the weaker person controls the relationship. Always has, always will. The stronger person is the one who gives more. They're the ones who walk the second mile. That's why we always kind of like get around a weak person and just kind of like walking on eggs with them. There's always more give and more take from the healthy person than the weak one. And the stronger person controls the response. How we respond to that person that is not healthy really controls a lot of what's going to happen. People principle number 4, the hammer principle. Never use a hammer to swat a fly off someone's head. Alexander McLaren said, if you would win the world, melt it. Do not hammer it. The question I must ask myself, would others say I overreact to small things in a relationship? I can think back in our early part of our marriage for Margaret and me, I did. In fact, one of the great issues I had to work through in my own life was the fact that when Margaret and I would have an argument, I thought my job was to win. I thought my job was to prove I was right. And I would, because I'm a good debater and a good argument, I would win. I would just win. And I would just kind of want somebody to high-five me, not her, of course. And what I began to realize as that relationship increased was I was winning the arguments, but I was losing the love. And I began to pull back, and I began to understand that the hammer principle is a principle that I really needed to follow. That you just don't have to beat someone up to prove a point. When tempted to use overkill, I try to temper my behavior using the following 4 T's. You may want to embrace them when you find yourself in a similar situation. Number 1, total picture. Total picture. Before I overreact, before I use a hammer, I've got to ask myself, do I see the whole picture? Or am I like the guy who was in the cocktail lounge and a man rushed into him real quick and said, quick, do you have a cure for hiccups? And the guy reached behind the bar and grabbed a wet towel and just smacked him up across the head. And he's kind of proud of himself. He said, now, do you have hiccups now? And the guy says, well, no, but I never did. It's my wife who's out in the car. He just missed. He just missed the total picture. In your notes, do you come to conclusions long before the problem has been laid out before you? That is a common occurrence for most of us who have strong personalities. That's why I've trained myself to follow a process to keep me from hammering people with answers before they finish asking the question. When someone is sharing his point of view with me, I try to listen, ask questions, listen again, ask more questions, listen some more, then respond. The second T is timing. Dorothy Neville observed, the real art of conversation is not only to say the right thing in the right place, but to leave unsaid the wrong thing at the tempting moment. It seems to me that the most common cause of bad timing in relationships is selfish motives. For example, if you have small children, think about their timing. It's often poor, but that's because they usually think only of themselves. For that reason, when little things bother us, our number 1 objective must be putting our personal agendas aside and building the relationship. If you have examined your motives and you can be certain that they're good, then you need to ask yourself 2 timing questions. First, am I ready to confront? That's a pretty easy question to answer because that's really a matter of whether you've done your homework. And the second question is even harder. Is the other person ready to hear? If you've laid a relational foundation and the two of you are not in the heat of the battle, then the answer may be yes. Total picture, timing. Number 3, tone. In other words, it's not what I say, but it's the tone of which I say it. People often respond to our attitude and actions more than to our words. Many petty conflicts occur because people use the wrong tone of advice. The writer of Proverbs stated, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." Number 4, the last T, temperature. As tempers flare, people are prone to dropping bombs when using a slingshot will do. And that can cause a lot of trouble because the size of the problem often changes based on how it is handled. In general, if the reaction, here we go, this is a great test. If the reaction is worse than the action, the problem usually increases. If the reaction is less than the action, the problem usually decreases. That's why I try to follow a self-imposed guideline that I call the reprimand rule. Take 30 seconds to share feelings, and then it's over. My wife Margaret and I, for many years, have had a system that helps us in this area. Because we have found, whether it's working with our married children and in-laws in the process of family, whether it's mothers and dads or sisters and brothers, etc., we found that we need each other's help. Because there are times when one spouse wants to let the temperature get a little higher and let the emotional pitch get a little higher. And so what we have discovered is when we're in any kind of confronting situations, that we sit together. We try to, if we're in a living room or somewhere, we try to sit on the couch and we hold hands. Not because we're in love, we are in love. But we hold hands to help each other. And if any time I feel Margaret's raising an octave high, or if she feels that I am, we just squeeze each other's hands, which just means, down, boy. Down, boy. Take a pill. Relax. Take a walk. Go outside. Kick something outside. We just try to help each other because what we realize is the temperature absolutely, allowing it to get too hot, escalates everything. Now let me just stop for a moment. Do we not all have somebody who knows our buttons? Do we all not have somebody that just absolutely can push those buttons and off we go and we say, why do I let them get to me? Just remember the hammer principle. In fact, this last statement really sums it up well. Never let the situation mean more than the relationship. I have seen this violated way too often. I have seen people allow a situation become much more important than the relationship. Again, Margaret and I, we've been married for 35 years. And, if you've been married for 35 years, if you're going to have a great marriage, you work out through all these things. I mean, you sit down and you get systems, and I'm a kind of a system guy anyway. And Margaret and I, if we're having a debate or an argument about something, she's strong, I'm strong. I love strong women. And this whole process, and she's kind of saying, well, I think I ought to do this, I think we ought to. We have a great system. And the system is if one's starting to press the other a little bit too much, we just look at each other and say, hey, I'll say, hey, Margaret, remember, I'm your best friend. And it just settles us. Or she'll say, John, I'm your best friend. Sometimes when I get testy, she smiles and says, John, I think I'm your only friend. People principle number 5. The elevator principle. The elevator principle says we can lift people up or take people down in our relationships. In other words, people can be the wind beneath our wings or the anchor on our boat. The question I must ask myself, would others say that I lift them up or take them down? What kind of person are you? For years, psychologists have attempted to divide people into various categories. Sometimes an observant poet can do a better job, and Ella Wheeler Wilcox did so in the poem entitled, "Which Are You?" Here's what she said. There are two kinds of people on earth today, just two kinds of people, no more I say. Not the sinner and the saint, for it's well understood that the good are half bad and the bad are half good. Not the rich and the poor, for to rate a man's wealth, you must first know the state of his conscience and health. Not the humble and proud, for in life's little span, who puts on vain airs is not counted a man. Not the happy and sad, for the swift flying years bring each man his laughter and each man his tears. No, the two kinds of people on earth I mean are the people who lift and the people who lean. Wherever you go, you will find the earth's masses are always divided in just two classes. And oddly enough, you will find too, I ween, that only one lifter to 20 who lean. In which class are you? Are you easing the load of overtaxed lifters who toil down the road? Or are you a leaner who lets others share your portion of labor and worry and care? It's a great poem. And I have discovered, as a fact, that you can divide almost everybody into those two classes. There are people who lift, and there are people who lean. So let me get real specific with you. There are two types of lifters. Number one, some people add something to your life, and for those people, we enjoy them. Think about it for a moment. You have people in your life, do you not? They just add to you. They just contribute. And it's great joy to be with them. I have a wonderful CEO friend of a Fortune 500 company who I've developed a pretty strong relationship in the last few years. And when we were developing that relationship, one day he looked at me, in all honesty, he said, "John," he said, what do you want? I said, "I don't want anything." I said, "You have to just understand, I don't need anything. I'm already taken care of." And he looked at me and big tears came in his eyes. He says, "I don't have any friends who don't want something." Well, I said, "Now you do." In fact, I said, "You can call me your easy friend." And whenever the CEO friend of mine introduces me to anybody, he always says, "This is John, my easy friend." We need some of those in our life, do we not? They just add to us. But there's another kind of lifter also. There are some people who add something to life, but there are some people who multiply something in life. To those people, we value them. Anyone who wants to can become an adder. It takes only a desire to lift people up and intentionality to follow through. But to go to another level in relationships, to become a multiplier, one must be intentional, strategic, and skilled. The greater the talent and resources a person possesses, the greater his or her potential to become a multiplier. Two kinds of lifters, those who add, those who multiply. But there are also two types of leaners. Some people subtract something from life. We tolerate them. Julius Caesar, playwright William Shakespeare's Cassius asserts, "A friend should bear his friend's infirmities, but Brutus makes mine greater than they are." That's what subtractors do. They do not bear our burdens, and they make heavier the ones we already have. The sad thing about subtractors is that what they do is usually unintentional. If you don't know how to add to others, then you probably subtract by default. That is a major statement. I believe that the subtracting leaner doesn't realize they're subtracting. And I see it happen all the time. Now, if I know them well enough, most of the time I don't. But if I know them well enough, I will pull them aside, and I try to help them here. I think most people get up every day and look for someone to make their day. Look for someone to help them. I believe most people every day chip away at relationships and subtract some. I think it's usually unintentional. But there's another kind of leaner. There are those who subtract, but some people, number two, divide something in life, and we avoid them. Dividers are so damaging because, unlike subtractors, their negative actions are usually intentional. They are hurtful people who make themselves look or feel better by trying to make someone else do worse than they do. And as a result, they damage relationships and create havoc in people's lives. It's like the insecure company president who brought his personnel director in and said, search in this organization for an alert, aggressive young man who could step into my shoes, and when you find him, fire him. Let's review. If we're going to be what I call people ready, then we have to understand the lens principle that says who we are determines how we see others. So we don't see people as they are, we see people as we are, which is the mirror principle. The first person we must examine is ourselves. The pain principle, hurting people hurt people and are easily hurt by them. The hammer principle, never use a hammer to swat a fly off of someone's head. And the elevator principle, we lift people up or we take people down in our relationships. Now, before I go to the next level of relationships, let me just say this. The first 5 are brutal. When you look at them, you say, oh my goodness, I could be in trouble. But here's what I know. If you cannot work yourself through those first 5, there is no hope for you in developing solid relationships with people. You've got to look at yourself and you've got to be realistic about yourself and where you are and who you are and how you think. So those first 5 principles in preparing us to get ready for relationships are all about looking kind of at us, not at other people, and making sure that we're the right kind of person before we meet the right kind of person.